Hi there, everyone. I'm Betsy Peterson, the director of the American Folklife Center, and on behalf of the staff, I'd like to welcome you here to the Library of Congress today for the latest presentation of our Benjamin Botkin Lecture Series. The Botkin Series is an opportunity for the American Folklife Center to feature and highlight the work of leading scholars in the disciplines of folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, and cultural heritage, while also enhancing our collections at the American Folklife Center. For the center and the library, the Botkin Lectures allow us to expand our acquisitions. All of these lectures are videotaped and become part of the permanent collection of the Folklife Center. And in addition, the lectures are posted as webcasts on the library's website, so they'll be available for viewing to internet patrons throughout the world and for generations to come. So with that caveat, let me say if you have your cell phone or any other electronic device, please turn it off at this point, or silence it at any rate. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Jon Kay, who has a very long title, which I need to read. He is the professor of practice in the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology at Indiana University, as well as the director of Traditional Arts Indiana and the curator of Folklife and Cultural Heritage at the Mathers Museum of World Cultures in Bloomington, Indiana. Jon received his master's degree from Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green and his Ph.D. in folklore from Indiana University. His accomplishments and recognitions are numerous, in addition to authoring numerous books and publications, producing scores of museum exhibits and documentary films. Jon has also received an Archie Green Fellowship from the American Folklife Center in 2013 to document the occupational folklife of Indiana park rangers. And at that same year, he also was honored with a Governor's Arts Award from the Governor of Indiana. But today, we're here for another activity. Folklorists have always sought out the older members of communities. They are researching for their vast reservoir of knowledge and their insights. Elders who practice folk and traditional arts are celebrated for their work supporting community life and the continuation of important cultural traditions. But rarely do we explore how these practices support the elders themselves as they age. Dr. Kay's research has sought to correct this oversight. For more than 20 years now, Jon has been doing innovative research on folk arts and aging by exploring the ways in which traditional arts help older adults find resilience in later life. His publications on this topic include Folk Art and Aging, Life Story Objects and Their Makers, and last year's The Expressive Lives of Elders, Folklore, Art, and Aging. And we will have copies of this latest book available for signing after the talk. So today's presentation centers on how everyday expressive practices help elders combat feelings of loneliness, helplessness, and boredom that beset so many older adults in the United States. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jon Kay.
Thank you so much, Betsy. It's a great honor to be here in this room and get to talk to you all. For a dyslexic kid from rural southern Indiana, the idea of getting to go to a library to give a talk would be a big deal. The idea of going to this library to give a talk is an even bigger deal. So thank you for letting that happen. And I would be amiss if I didn't thank Nancy for following up with me about this topic and arranging for this. It's greatly appreciative. From 1997 to 2004, I worked as the folklorist for the Stephen Foster Folk Culture Center in White Springs, Florida. This was my first long-term position as a public folklorist, which meant that I was based in a community for an extended period of time. As a folklorist for the state park, I coordinated craft demonstrations, I produced public events and hosted elder hostel sessions. Looking back on those years, it was then that I started thinking earnestly about the expressive lives of older adults. That is, how the stories, food, crafts, games, music, and other forms of traditional knowledge that a person accumulates throughout their lives becomes a valuable resource for them as they reach advanced age. While working at the Folklife Center, I witnessed how traditional arts not only supported older adults in later life, but helped many to thrive well into their 80s and 90s. Each fall, the center hosted an event called Rural Folklife Days, a multi-day celebration of rural traditions. Most of the participants at the event were of retirement age, and this group of elder quilters, blacksmiths, cane syrup makers, jelly canners, checker players, musicians, and storytellers shared their shared skills they learned in their youth with thousands of school children. While the event aimed to teach the students about local history and traditions, I quickly realized that the older artists got as much out of or perhaps even more, out of the event as the students. In addition to the small stipend that the park paid the demonstrators for their participation in the event, each elder was rewarded with getting to share their life stories and special skills with the young attendees. I recognize that these demonstrators were not like many older adults in the United States. That is, they were not isolated, bored, or helpless, which is commonly recognized as the three plagues of aging. Instead, these elders were connected, engaged, and skilled. I realized that the elders involved in these public programs that I produced had much to contribute to my understanding of life, not just folk life. Programs like Rural Folklife Days are not unique in the work of public folklorists in the United States. From the Festival of American Folklife to workshops in local libraries, folklorists work with older tradition bearers to share their personal experiences and talents with the public. However, folklorists seldom focus on how the programs and events that they produce may work to improve the quality of life of older adults. Recently, I was hosting a limestone carving program at a state park when out of the corner of my eye, I saw an older artist who I'd worked with a few years earlier. Glenn Hall's daughter had driven the 93-year-old to the event. "He made me bring him here to see you," she explained. "Long time no see, Mr. Hall," I said to the retired farmer turned metal sculptor. "It was May the 5th, 2012, at the Patoka Festival," he replied. His daughter stared at him and asked, "How did you remember that?" "Well, it was just about the best day of my life," he explained. The one-day festival at which Glenn had demonstrated was just one of several arts programs that I had helped produce at parks that year. I had enjoyed watching Glenn interact with visitors at the festival, but had given little thought to what his participation meant to him. Stories, art, food, music, dance, play, and similar expressive practices of elders help build and maintain their social lives. A 2015 study reviewed data from more than 300,000 people over a 7-year period and found that individuals with good social relationships were more than twice as likely to survive than people with poor social relationships, which means creating and maintaining social connection is comparable to quitting smoking as a predictor of living longer. In fact, isolation and loneliness seem to surpass obesity and sedentary lifestyle as risk factors for mortality in later life. These creative practices that folklorists often study and support are more than just expressions of cultural identity, which they are. They're often public expressions of selves. They help older adults connect with others, reflect upon their lives, and present themselves to the world that often overlooks its older adults. These self-presentations deployed by elders are also a public form of life review. Gerontologist Robert Butler's 1963 article, The Life Review, challenged prevailing notions about the role of reminiscence in the lives of seniors and argued that life review was a naturally occurring universal mental process. He noted that elders, with an explanatory examination of the past, forged new meaning out of old memories, sometimes as a way to understand and perhaps come to terms with their personal history. Some older adults engage in this reconsideration of the past through the use of life story objects, the material items that elders keep, display, and arrange that relate to personal memories and stories. A specific subset of life story objects go beyond personal persistent possessions and are works specifically crafted to structure and tell personal narratives. Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimlet noted that these creations, which she called memory objects, were ways for elders to materialize internal images and through them to recapture earlier experiences. Elders may use these time-shifting works to elicit interest, explicate personal narratives, and to share beliefs and values. Whether arranging family photographs, painting pictures of past events, or wood-burning important names and places onto a walking stick, life story objects often anticipate social interactions and storytelling events, which is just one aspect of their creative utility in the complex role in the lives of older adults. To reduce memory paintings, story quilts, and other forms of life story objects to mere works of art or storytelling props fails to appreciate the complex and diverse narrative nature of these creations and the process that brought them into existence. The making and use of these objects serve multiple functions in the lives of older adults. They are objects to reflect upon, tools to explain events and their meanings, the product of a pastime that filled the lonely hours. A tool to explain events and their meanings, a product of the pastime to fill the lonely hours, a mnemonic device to remind the forgetful, a meditative practice to help older adults make sense of the past, a material legacy to leave to their family and friends. In this part of my presentation, I examine the work of three elders who create pictorial narrative scenes of recalled memories, a form of material life review. Then I'll link these practices to resiliency in later life, which is what I really want to focus our energy on. In the fall of 2013, the Columbus Area Arts Council invited me to present a workshop about these special objects and their narrative life review function at the center, an active senior facility. While going over my presentation at the center before the others arrived, a tall, thin man poked his head in a room, and I invited him in and introduced myself. "What do you have there?" I asked, pointing to the two boards wrapped in towels that he had brought for the show and tell portion of the evening's program. "I do memory carvings," he explained as he unpacked the boards. On the surface of each, he had carved detailed scenes from his childhood. The pair of boards visually told the story of a train trip in 1941 that the elder Bob Taylor took with his parents to Coney Island in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was impressed at the artist's mastery of his craft and the narrative detail invested in these panoramic panels. "How long have you carved?" "Since I was 8 years old or so, but I didn't start doing memory carvings until after I retired," he explained. My head raced with questions, but the room was beginning to fill with more workshop participants. I want to talk to you more," I said, "but I have to finish getting ready for this program. Can we talk afterwards?" Several of the elders brought examples of their needlepoint, quilts, wood carvings, and other handmade works, which they took turns sharing throughout the evening. When it came time for Bob to show his carvings, he stood and addressed the room. "Since I've been retired, I've been doing memory carvings of my childhood." He then lifted the boards and placed them on two tabletop stands, revealing the carved scenes. The audience's appreciation was audible as they exhaled oohs and ahs. He then began to tell the story of his childhood trip to Coney Island and his process of researching and making the panels to commemorate it. The pair of panels tells the two phases of the Coney Island trip. The first shows the family ready to board a train behind the Cummins building in Columbus, Indiana. His grandfather, brother, mother, and father are waiting for him while a brass band plays. The second panel shows them arriving at Coney Island and includes the steamboat, the Island Queen, that ferried them across the river. The Ferris wheel, a roller coaster, and a merry-go-round in the amusement park are shown in the distance. He even includes a coal barge that his father just happened to snap a picture of that day. The artist's scenes are beautiful compilations of remembered moments and discovered images. In Bob's memory carvings, he unites the disparate shards of memories and discovered details into a cohesive, recalled world, through which he constructs his tight narrative scenes and tells his personal stories. Older adults who make life story objects often engage in a process of personal discovery and creative expression, which is frequently followed by a series of presentations or narrations of his creations. Exhibiting his carvings and sharing his stories at gatherings at the Mill Race Center, the county fair, or a local wood carving show are important to Bob because they provide opportunities for discussion about his life and his art. Just as he enjoys a period of reflection and research that precedes the lengthy creative process, he relishes the occasion when he gets to present his carvings and talk about his personal memories and research discoveries. His process of reflection, creation, and narration is a dynamic system of life review, a system, I would argue, of resilience. While carving is a solitary act, the elder's work of researching his memories and then later presenting his carvings are social activities. During his research or discovery phase, he goes through a period of sharing his memories and learning from others about theirs. Through carving his scenes, however, his personal recollections blend with his research to produce a master scene that visually references important narrative aspects. Finally, by narrating his completed panels, his wood carvings and storytelling talents unite into a unified performance. And more than once I saw Bob set up at a county fair or a wood carving show, and he'd pull out this panel here and he'd set it out there, and someone would be milling around the wood carving show and they would look and they'd see this beautiful carving of a train, and they look at the train and then they see this dead whale on the car of a train, and then they look at the train, and then they look over at Bob, and then they look at the dead whale. And before long, then Bob will get this little wry smile, because he knows that he's got them, you know. And then he tells them a story about someone in California, a dead whale had washed ashore, they had loaded it on a train, and they were traveling across the United States, charging a nickel or a dime to be able to see this dead whale. I gave this a talk about this in Dallas, Texas. This is in Indiana. In Dallas, Texas, I gave the talk, and some people said, "We saw that." So of a certain age, this is a thing. Like Bob Taylor, Mary Ann Sykes makes life story objects to help her construct and convey her personal experience narratives. But rather than carving memories, she hooks rugs that are distillations of often told family stories. Alone in the front room of her home near Chesterton, Indiana, Mary Ann works at her small rug hooking frame, pulling colorful woolen strips through the weave of a piece of linen fabric. The artist fills in animated scenes recalled from a greased pig contest test she attended long ago at a county fair. Having sketched the event onto the fabric base of what will become a hooked rug, she plies her talents to make the scene come alive. She has already hooked the buildings and the farm animals into the rug, and today she focuses on the section where the kids chase the pig. She hooks for a while and then studies her progress. Something's not quite right, so she quickly pulls the loops out and begins again. Work and rework. This is the elder's daily rug-making practice. The hours pass into days, the days into weeks, until she finishes her memory project and begins to contemplate her next project, her next rug. In making her storytelling creation, the elder edits her memories and her art to produce rugs that are both beautiful to see and pleasant to recall. This is the way Marianne fills her long winter days in rural northern Indiana, making rugs and meditating on her life and her family. Marianne's rug making requires her to work through her memories and often told stories. Since every piece is a culmination of months of reminiscing, sketching, and hooking, her creative process merges remembered stories with her visual representations, which produce a unified narrative theme. In the same way that she repurposes wool in the rugs, Marianne reworks her memories into art that constructs her life stories. Just as an old sweater must be unraveled and washed before it can be used in a rug, a story must be taken apart, broken into its basic narrative pieces, purged of unnecessary and unpleasant elements, and then hooked together into an evocative scene. Marianne's projects, therefore, are not just about creating art, but moreover, about reworking and making sense of the past. Marianne's family home features prominently in a lot of her work, but especially in the worst snowstorm rug that she created. It's kind of meaningful after yesterday's weather, I guess. The worst snowstorm rug shows the house and the surrounding structures, and Marianne's children at play rowdily in the streets. Her rug records a snowstorm which commemorates the 26 inches of snow that fell, and the week her children spent at home. Her storytelling collapses the week of play into one wild, snowy scene. And I had an audio clip to play here, but we weren't able to get it play. But basically, she tells this story of her daughter Barbara selling snowballs 2 for 5 cents, and they built an igloo on the ground, and the police were called because of all the rowdy stuff that was going on there. And you can see her house in the back, the one with the red door, and she points to it as she tells me the story. And I said, well, why did you paint your door red? And she goes, our door wasn't red. She actually made it red so that it was easy to tell, easy to point to. The red wool locates a recalled family home, allowing the narrator to easily orient the audience to a storied streetscape. The artist makes her rugs to be both visually and narratively interesting. For example, in Marianne's 4th of July rug, she similarly reworks the Dickens Street into a fanciful and entertaining narrative scene that blends her memories with her aesthetic sensibilities and creative imaginations. Marianne hooked the 4th of July in 2007. Also a Dickens Street scene, the storyteller hooked the door to the home in red as before. But in this piece, the children have traded in their snowballs and mittens for sparklers and hula hoops. Comparing the brownstone house beside the Sykes home in the snow scene with the one in this festive view, examiners can see that the house next door sits back from the street, giving it a missile-like appearance. Marianne explains, it was really forward, but I wanted it to look like a rocket with the firecrackers. Then this subtle but whimsical alteration to the storyscape demonstrates the artist's mastery over her craft and narrative. As elders age, they often have to relinquish control over aspects of their daily life, but Marianne remains strong and independent. And through her craft, she reveals her creative ability to make and remake her life through story and art. If you remember, I talked about the 3 plagues of aging, of being isolated, being bored, and feeling helpless. And if you think about the artwork that I've been discussing, it's very much an antidote to those 3 things. How can you be alone when you've got a rug hooking club that you're going to go visit? How can you be bored when you've got a rug that needs to be made? How can you be helpless when you can change a house into a rocket ship when you want to? You know, those things change. I'll tell you about another person. Gustav Potthoff paints scenes to help him tell important life stories, many of which are too horrific to fathom through words alone. For over 30 years, Goss's paintings helped him to maintain a sense of identity while bearing witness to the atrocities of war and memorializing those who did not survive. By painting his recollection, Goss has developed a blended system of artful communication that transcends the language, age, and cultural barriers he might face in his social interactions near his Indiana home. In addition to making and sharing these visual stories, give him a strong sense of purpose and satisfaction with his life, a reason to endure. It gives him resilience. Driving slowly down the divided street, straining to read the house numbers, I see a small bungalow surrounded by beautiful flower beds. A large American flag mounted on the front of the house waves in the wind. Goss is sitting on the front porch waiting for me. I park on the street and I walk up to the veteran. His eyes smile. Though I am a few minutes early, I can tell that he has been waiting for me all morning. I juggle my camera and my recorder, and we shake hands, and he hurries me into the house. Artwork, family photographs, and various mementos crowd the living room. Goss introduces me to his wife, Adele, and quickly escorts me through the narrow kitchen to his studio, a small room overflowing with more photographs and keepsakes, as well as his art supplies and recently finished paintings. He clears a stool for me, and we talk about his life and the art that he makes to chronicle it. As thick as his hair, the elder's accent clouds our conversation. I listen closely, trying to piece together the story he earnestly tells me in broken English and by pointing to his paintings. With the aid of both words and images, I begin to grasp his incredible story of pain, loss, and resilience. Born in the islands of Maluku near Australia, Gus Potoff was raised in a Dutch colonial orphanage where he stayed until Germany declared war on the Netherlands. Then, young Gus enlisted to learn to be a mechanic for the Netherlands Army Tank Battalion in Bandung, Java. In 1941, just 17 years old and only 4 weeks into his deployment, the Imperial Japanese Army captured Gus, and he remained their prisoner until the end of World War II. While in prison, his captors subjected Gus and the other POWs to a brutal regimen of labor that included the construction of the infamous bridge on the River Kwai and the Hellfire Pass, both of which were part of the Imperial Japanese Railroad system constructed in the borderlands of Burma and Thailand during the war. Concerned that the 16,000 POWs who died building the Death Railway would be forgotten, Gus paints to tell his story of captivity and survival, as well as to find peace with his wartime memories by commemorating those who died. I never know how to paint, recalls Gus. I never learned art. Art came after I retired from Cummins. The artist taught himself to paint scenes from his mind's eye shortly after he left Cummins, a diesel engine manufacturer in Columbus, Indiana, where Gus's family moved in 1966. With time on his hand, Gus felt compelled to tell his stories. He started volunteering at the Atterbury Bacalar Museum, a small veterans museum adjacent to a municipal airport in Columbus. With his strong accent and gregarious smile, he forged friendships with the other veteran volunteers, even though he had served in a foreign military. Each Tuesday morning, he would go to the museum and visit with the other veterans and talk to museum goers about his history as a POW. Though he would speak with passion and about personal experience, language remains a consistent issue. Gus had difficulty translating and communicating his memories so that visitors could understand him. Fortunately, he took up painting, which he used to augment his stories and to make his memories more explainable and durable. Alongside vintage uniforms, maps, and weaponry, the museum displayed Gus's paintings, which told a more colorful and personal story than the display of drab green artifacts. Prominently displayed, the first image Gus painted now hangs in the museum. It depicts the POW camp near Kwai River, where Gus lived when he was liberated on August 17, 1945. Each Tuesday, the elderly artist positions himself near the painting in order to tell visitors his tales of captivity, endurance, and forgiveness. On the surface, Gus, Bob, Marianne seem to have little in common, other than their art is inspired by their memories. Nevertheless, there are other traits that these three artists share with many elders with whom I have worked and they have in common that I believe deserve closer attention. First, for most elders who make life story art, it seems to be a solitary act, a practice that can fill the lonely times in an elder's life. While they are often created in solitude, they anticipate social interaction. Second, these three elders started their life review projects in their retirement years and when they experienced some other rupture in their daily life, such as when Marianne moved to northern Indiana, where she became removed from her family. Bob had carved since he was 8, but memory carving became the work to which he devoted himself in retirement. And Gus never painted until he retired. The third common denominator is that these older adults devote a considerable amount of time to designing and making their work, spending days, weeks, and even months working on these personal objects provide them with special tasks to which they can devote themselves. Finally, these adaptive pursuits also help elders to maintain and forge personal relationships. Through exhibiting life story objects, artists engage in a special kind of communicative conduct. The artists presented here use their work to connect with others. If I had to pick one word to describe Gus, Marianne, and Bob, it would be resilient. Folklore, that is, the stories we tell, the music we make, and the things we create, is our adaptive repertoire for dealing with our everyday encounters and problems. They are not the ephemera of our culture, but an individual's creative core, their cultural competency for handling whatever life may throw at them. In my research into the expressive lives of elders, I have seen the importance of adaptability and resilience in the maintenance and recovery of an elder's quality of life. The concept of resilience, however, is often oversimplified. Oh, she's so resilient. I could never do that, one might say. But resilience is not a thing, a quality to be possessed. Rather, it's a system of supports used by people to help address physical and social and psychological strains that may potentially disrupt their everyday lives. Psychologists Ursula Straudinger and Werner Grieve define resilience as a constellation of risk factors or stressors on the one hand and the available protective factors that are both psychological and non-psychological nature on the other. Traditional arts, narrative practices, and other expressive acts are noteworthy protective factors. In the lives of older adults, many folklorists have witnessed how cultural practices have helped elders retain or recover functionality after a physical, social, or psychological event interrupted their lives. For many traditional arts serve as a personal anchor when hardships emerge in later life. When due to declining mobility, Ruth Newhouser could no longer work in the flower beds that surrounded her home in Upland, Indiana. A new form emerged. Tatting, a craft that she learned as a child, blossomed in her later years. She started knotting intricate lace flowers, which she then would artfully arrange into beautiful bouquets, reminiscent of the ones she would cut from her garden. She would make these and get a whole stack of them piled up, and then she would donate them to the Mennonite Relief Sale, and they would sell these to raise funds for that. When arthritis made it difficult for Nancy Morgan of White Springs, Florida, to work at her quilting frame with her friends, she revived the art of briar stitching, a craft remembered from her childhood. For both Nancy and Ruth, their adaptive art allowed them to maintain their sense of well-being and regain meaning in their lives, even when physical factors restricted their creative options. A more striking example of resiliency in later life is the story of celebrated baker Mary Alice Collins. Sorry, I have the wrong one. A more striking example of resiliency in later life is the story of celebrated baker Mary Alice Collins, who each year would win dozens of ribbons at the Indiana State Fair. In 2014, Traditional Arts Indiana, the program that I direct, honored her as an Indiana State Fair master. A year later, Mary Alice became gravely ill. All of her fingers on both hands, as well as both legs, were amputated to save her life. Nevertheless, the following summer, she entered more than 30 pies at the state fair and has each year since. Why? Competitive baking allows her to demonstrate to herself and others that she could adapt to her new life. This is not to say that baking pies and quilting or lace making makes life easy, but rather the maintaining, reviving, and adapting of an expressive practice provides an older adult with an additional resource that they can employ when they are faced with a seemingly insurmountable stress on their life. In his book, Chain Carvers, Old Men Crafting Meaning, Simon Bronner noted that the physical and psychological stresses prompted the older men in his book to take up carving again. Carving was an adaptive practice that helped the retirees cope with their changing lives and relationships. Similarly, in my book, Folk Art and Aging, Life Story Objects and Their Makers, I focus on art making, specifically the memory projects of older adults that I've talked about here, serve as an adaptive strategy for their makers after they retire, lose a loved one, become dislocated from their home, or some other physical or psychological strain is placed on their lives. The work that these everyday practices do in the lives of older adults, however, is often trivialized. After all, quilting is just a hobby. That painting's not very pretty. Or your music's really not commercially viable. But as craft scholar Alan Eaton observed, the time has come. And this is from a quote from 1937. And he said, "When every kind of work will be judged by two measurements, one by the product itself, as is now done, the other by the effect of the work on the producer. When that time comes, the handicrafts will be given a much more important place in our plan of living than they now have. For unquestionably, they possess values which are not generally recognized." I believe that the value that Eaton observed, at least in part, was resilience. And it's my hope that public folklore can study this aspect of resiliency in later life and continue to create programs that support it. Thank you all very much. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions or, yes.
You talk about individuals who learn a craft as a youngster and they're now reaching back to that craft. But in schools today, at least U.S. schools today, we don't teach, crafts. Do you have a thought of how to connect that?
I think that I have a few observations. However, one is some of these people started later in life. Maybe they did different types of arts and crafts. So people come to traditional arts at different times and different places, and folk arts in general. Some revive, some would start when they're young and then revive it again later. Some would pick it up later. Some would continue it all throughout their life. One of the things I hear from a lot of older adults is that they have this real concern about the unstructured playtime and the fact that they had opportunities to make things with their hands and to do things, and they don't see that same opportunity happening. And so I think that instead of worrying so much in school about job placement and teaching skills along that, once we take an observation that this type of work really is about making people wholly human, then we're going to have a different view of it. I think one other aspect, in 2016 I did a folk art summit, and we brought together all different types of artists from all over the state of Indiana, Native American artists, African American artists, limestone carvers, blacksmiths, all different types of people. And they went around and each one began to introduce themselves. And a theme started to emerge. The theme went, when I was about 11 years old, my uncle, or when I was 12, I first started really. And it does seem that there is a really important time in a person's developmental life where they are able to pour themselves into this. I've seen this happen with my son with playing music. And I made a marked decision not to give a cell phone to him until he was 16. So I won't go down that rabbit hole. Anyway.
When you first mentioned memory objects, I first thought of souvenirs and other things that people accumulate all too often, and as decades go by, they have just so much. I like this idea of making memory objects by yourself, but don't people who are artists feel that that's a part of them and feel reluctant to give them up?
Yeah, all the artists here that I talk about, they would never get rid of their memory object. Yeah, these are not, they maybe have done things that are creative. Bob Taylor sold one of his memory carvings, and it was to the church that was featured in one of the memory carvings. And that caused him big angst to do that.
Yeah, because they put so much into them, into these objects. You mentioned the woman who donated something to a Mennonite
Relief sale?
Yeah. So sometimes that happens.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about memory objects with those pieces. Those are pieces that she uses that are based in a traditional craft that she's come up with her own creative expressive power. I was focusing on the aspect of having something that you can do to promote resiliency. So there's life story objects, which is one aspect that provides utility, but then there's also all types of creative aspects, playing music, crafts, dance. I had a whole section that if you wanted to stay for another hour, I could have done on traditional music and dance that we could talk about, but I focused on these things. So, what other questions? Aaron.
I'm curious to know what the effect is upon family members of these older adults. Do you ever talk to
Yeah, when I did my book, Folk Art and Aging, I made a point of giving the elders a copy of what I was writing about them and getting feedback from them, but I also sent it to their family. And I wanted them to make sure that they were okay with what I was doing in my research. And it became really interesting to me how for many, they're just so proud of their family, of their parent or their aunt or their uncle or their grandfather in some cases. But also there's a lot of the people who are doing life story objects, there's a lot of shepherding and care that ends up having to happen there too. Goes along with that.
Have you observed whether there's a dispersion of craftspeople from either growing up in rural environments or living in rural environments versus urban environments?
I found creativity in all places. I've showed some pictures of Milano Passage. Aaron Roth and I, a mutual friend, was a tamburitza builder. He lived up in Gary, Indiana, in the Chicagoland area. Marianne Sykes grew up in Chicago, and the rugs that she's making are a reflection of that lifestyle. I've worked with African American drum makers. I had a whole section on that and resilience in the life of a man by the name of Roy Spite that is there. So I don't think that just because some of the examples I focused on were smaller towns, that you should read much into that. I think there is something to what was being said before about a creativity of a certain age in time that people are actually There was a time when people went through shop class or went through home ec and learned to do things with their hands. There was a time when people had unstructured playtime, which allowed them to devote themselves. There was a time when grandparents were taking care of kids after school and said, here, do this while I'm working on this. And there was a lot of social dimension that actually makes this happen for this particular generation. And so I will put the caveat that this is a generational study, not a for all time study. Thank you. This is my friend Jenny Yan. Jenny and James. James just passed away. James was a Chinese calligrapher. Jenny does Tai Chi, and they were just really instrumental in going to all the programs that I would ever host at the museum. They would always be there. He would do calligraphy workshops, and she would come help, and I just like having her with me here. Very much so, that there is this idea, there's anticipation on both ends. This kind of conceiving and designing. A lot of people end up like, do you have a picture of this? Or do you have that? Or do you remember so-and-so? What was that like? And so it gives them an opportunity to go out. I'm working on this. Can you tell me? And so there's stuff on the front end as well. Then there's the alone time when people are filling their time with the actual long and tedious process. Someone like Mary Ann, she's a wonderful artist. She could have painted that. She could have drawn that. She could have done almost anything, but she chose to hook it. This kind of deliberate practice of being able to pour herself into something so time-consuming as a hooked rug. But then this idea of being able to go back and have these opportunities to share them and show them at various places. I would say in some ways these memory objects are as much about those sharing and showing as they are about the creative process for some adults. For others, that's not true. But for the ones I focused on here, the whole time they're making, these are being made to share, made to take someplace. And one of the things as I go around to senior apartments and nursing home facilities and those types of things, the lack of like social space for showing the things that people create. You know, we want to focus on creative aging, and it's like we're going to create this stuff, and oh, that's good for the brain, and it is. But then there's not necessarily that social aspect of displaying and saying, I made this, and let me tell you about this. And that's why I started doing these show and tell programs, and they're really popular. When I go someplace, I'll ask people to bring stuff out, and people, you know, sometimes it's stuff they made long ago, sometimes it's what they're working on then, but it gives them a chance to be an expert in their life. So, thank you. Barry.
I wondered about narrative traditions, whether you encountered people who sort of reconstruct their history as an oral narrative, or even I've encountered a lot of older people who, in later life, self-publish a reminiscence about their life, that sort of thing. Did you encounter that as well?
When my book came out about folk art and aging, I started getting, I must have been on some list or something, people started mailing me books that they had written about their life. And it's like, oh, the stuff that you talk about art, I'm doing that with words and with poetry or with that. So it's very much that same, the same thing, this idea of probably going out and asking people a little bit about their experiences, reminiscence, being able to have a physical product that they can give to family members to leave a legacy. So that's the same thing. Same thing happens with musicians, curating a collection of song and producing a cassette tape or a CD or something. For many musicians is a very similar process. So, any other questions? Aaron? To me, there's two parts to the question that you're asking. One is the institutional question. Exhibit space or communal space where people can curate things. I wish I had the slide in here. I did a project with my students where we documented the shelves outside residents' rooms. They have these, they're used for wayfinding. And there's a little shelf outside the room. Someone that can't remember their room number, this will be me, and they'll have some type of thing that they'll remember or they'll see, and they'll know that that's their room because all those doors start to look the same. That's one example of someone, these end up being curated life story spaces or art spaces for many older adults that they do all types of performance things too, where they'll put candy out there or they'll put something that has a perception of value to see how long it lasts there before somebody steals it. You know, there's all these interesting things that people are doing in that type of exhibition space. So more exhibition space, more encouragement of personalizing the space that people are living within. The second part gets to this idea of the creative aging that's happening, and there's really this big push for art therapy, and I think that that's wonderful and great, and that needs to happen. But I also think that there needs to be more research into these kind of vernacular systems, these kind of emergent things that how people make their art, because you think about someone comes in and they do a art making project and as a workshop around a table, and then people go home and they never see the art again, or it gets thrown away or recycled, and it's totally not what I'm seeing in this kind of productive, successful aging models that I'm seeing with these older adults. They have to have long periods of time. Lots of times it's late at night that people are working. It has to have opportunity to share and display those, opportunity to narrate them as well. So there's all types of structural things that I hope that more ethnographic studies of these things could actually shed light on what needs to be happening in these spaces. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that work is being done very often. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I have two books, and I'm not sure which one they have here, whether it's Folk Art and Aging or Expressive Lives of Elders. The Folk Art and Aging is the Life Story Objects book, and that one's all me in the book. Well, it's not all me, it's all them in the book. The other book is an edited volume that I edited that looks at the material creative practices of artists all over the country through this. So, and I think they do have some of those here. There's also, I worked a deal with Indiana University Press. There's an open source version of this if you want to read a PDF. It's free, and that's been great for me to be able to give that to family members and elders that I'm working with. So I'm happy to share that link with you all as well. So thank you all very much.